Hey, welcome back to Fish Bones Fly Fishing in the Cayman Islands. I'm David E. Banks, owner, sometimes guide. Today we're going to do another fly tying story time where we try to make fly tying a little less boring. So let's get into it. I thought today I would tell the story of how I got into fly fishing and how that's related to a very specific fly. I didn't start off to be a bone fishing guide. I didn't even start off to fish for bonefish. I got into fly fishing almost entirely to fish for snook. And by accident and serendipity and a series of circumstances, I eventually ended up practicing fly fishing by bone fishing, which taught me a tremendous amount, as one might imagine, about bone fishing. The reality is it took me about a year to catch my first bonefish. I was pretty bad at it. I think I went 0 for 13 in that first year. Now, back in the day, I grew up handline fishing. You didn't have rods and reels and all this stuff. I grew up handline fishing with my grandfather. In the daytime, we would fish for snappers and parrotfish and grunts. We'd also troll with hand lines for different types of tuna, wahoo, mahi-mahi, big barracudas. We would drift for ocean triggerfish, again, all hand line. And then we would fish at night, because at night, certain types of fish would go to sleep and certain types of triggerfish. And then you could get a line down and you could get snappers and you could get other kinds of, groupers and bigger fish like that you couldn't fish for really during the day, because those triggerfish would just come and strip your bait off your line before it could get down. So you fish for those fish at night. One of the baits that we used was a silver-side minnow. I don't know what the real name of them is, but we call them fries. There's two different kinds down here. You got your loggerhead fry and your fine fry. But basically they're a silver side. They're about 1.5 inches, 2 inches long, silver, highly reflective, really smell like fish. And they school up most of the time. They're in deep water over deep coral in these grottos and canyons. And in fact, there's a place called, I think it's called Tarpon Alley, that the divers go to, and in there is these giant schools of silver sides, and the tarpons are hanging around them. But in the summertime, those lots of bait fish come in, and I don't know if it's a spawning aggregation or what it is, but they come in close to shore on a light southeast wind, and all the predators follow them. Tarpon, big jacks, yellow jacks and bar jacks, baby barracuda, garfish, and snook follow them. Now, growing up, I did not know what a snook was. We didn't do a lot of beach fishing, and even if we did, we're specifically targeting like mutton snappers and stuff. We're not snook. There's just not enough of them, and the snook are very sort of seasonal. Summertime, just like in Florida, they come out. They're on the beaches. They're not on the main beach. I've never seen them there, but they're on these other sandy, shallow areas. Usually following the bait, those schools of silver sides that come in during the summertime. Now, summertime was also, because there's light winds and great weather, when we used to do a lot of night fishing because it was fairly safe. During the winter, you get your northeast winds, sometimes north winds or northwesters, and it's really rough out there. So wintertime night fishing is not safe. So we didn't do a lot of it. But in the summertime, you get your southeast winds, it's nice and calm, and you can go and fish outside the reef and you can catch lots of fish. And plus, it's a time when a lot of fish spawn. One of our favorite baits was silver sides. First thing in the morning when it's glass calm, you could see them flipping on the surface. And we'd see them and we'd go and we'd get a net and we'd scoop them up and put them in a bucket, and that would be our bait for the night. We used it in a lot of different ways. You'd get an old conch shell Back in the day, there was plenty of conch shells just on the beach, and you could take a bunch of those minnows and shove them in the conch shell, and you throw them over the side, and that would make scent. That would make, you know, your chum to draw fish into that area, because they would have a hard time getting the minnows out of that conch shell. So it kind of slowly spread the scent, the chum. And then you would fish with that same thing. You'd, you know, have a heavy line, 40-pound test line, with a heavy, you know, egg sinker, and 30 to 40-pound test hand line, and you'd send it over the side. Usually had 2 hooks on it, you know, just in case you could get a double header. And you'd send that down, and we'd fish anywhere between 5 and 7 fathoms. A fathom is 6 foot, so, you know, as far as I can make a wingspan, that's 6 foot. So that morning, that giant ball of bait is near a dock. I go out there on the dock, and I look in to see where they are, so my grandfather and I can make a strategy. And around the school of bait fish are these big silver fish. They look a lot like snappers to me. They look like a Sailor's Choice or a Margate fish, which are both big, silvery looking fish that look like a snapper. But they have a black stripe on them, and they're kind of yellowish with dark fins. So I call my grandfather. I'm like, what are those? I don't think I've ever seen those before. He looks at them for a long time, and he goes, snooky fish. Those are snook. And I'm like, what's a snooky fish? What's a snook? He's like, well, you know, they have a lot of them in Florida. They're big time game fish. Apparently they eat really good. You gotta take the skin off though, otherwise they foam up in the pan. The natives call them soap fish. Fight hard, sport fish, good eating. They're large. I'm catching one of these. So my grandfather always carried a line, hand line with him. We catch some bait. We go and net all of our bait. I get some bait, put it on there, and throw it out. Snook could not care less. They don't care at all. So I'm like, okay, maybe they want something live. Now, you can't really fish a live minnow because they're so delicate. They just die instantly. So I go home. I have a spinning rod. I think it's one of the very few times in my life I've owned a spinning rod. And I have a little silver Apala on it. I think, oh, this might look like one of those sardines, like the bigger bait fish. Throw it out there. I go back, they're still there. Nothing. They don't care. I mean, zero response. Just kind of maybe turn their body to look at it and then just go back to what they were doing, just sitting there like logs. I got to go back to college in the next day or two. So I fly back to the States. And when I get back there, I'm hanging out in the office of one of my professors. And on his desk is a little calendar. And it has a fish on it. And it's a big jack. It's a Jack Crevalle or a horse-eye jack. I can't remember. And I was like, oh, you like fishing? He's like, oh, yeah. No, big time fly fisherman. I don't know what that is. I've never seen a river runs through it. I think I've only seen fly fishing gear once, and I laughed at it. I was like, you're not going to catch nothing in that big opaque line. I mean, like, where do you think you are? You know, I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know there was a leader on the end. I didn't know anything. You know, I was just like, tourists. Anyway, so he's like, yeah, I'm a fly fisherman. And I was like, oh, so you catch saltwater fish too? Because that's a jack. And he was like, oh, yeah. And I've caught those down in Florida. I was like, no kidding. He was like, yeah, you know, I was down there on a do-it-yourself fishing trip. And I was fishing for snook, but I caught these jacks. And I was like, hold on. You know what a snook is and you were fishing for them? He's like, oh, yeah. I caught some. I caught some snook on my own. I said, you caught snook. No, I had just tried every which way that I know how to fish to catch a snook with zero interest. And he's like, oh, yeah. I was like, how would you catch him? He's like, I caught him on a fly. I said, you caught him on a fly? He's like, I'll bring it in for you tomorrow. So the next day he brings in this little fly. It's a split wing. Looks like a miniature stew-apt fly, like a tarpon fly, but it's all white with a little bit of flashaboo coming off the tail. So it looks kind of like those silver sides that I had been catching. He's like, oh yeah, man. You know, the thing about fly fishing is when you move the fly, it looks alive. So you're using this bait, this lure that looks dead, but you make it look alive. And I was like, and you caught snook? He's like, yeah, man. I was like, well, where'd you get this thing? You know, I'm thinking I'll buy a bunch and I'll take them back home. I'll put them on a spinning rod. I don't know how to fly fish. I don't even know what that is, but I'll catch one. And he's like, I'll bring in my gear tomorrow. So he brings in his whole fly. He has a portable fly tying thing, brings it in and shows me how to tie flies. And so my first introduction is I started tying flies for snook. Now, one of my buddies also wanted to catch saltwater fish, but he lived in the Midwest. But he knew by doing some basic research online, the internet was brand new then, that we had snook and tarpon and bonefish and permit and all those fish here in the Cayman Islands. So he kind of like tricked me into learning to fly fish by, in the wintertime, he taught me how to tie flies. I really got into it. I loved it. And then in the spring, he took me out into a soccer field, gave me a fly rod, gave me some basic instructions. I started casting, and every once in a while I could feel the line floating. You know, it felt like when you're flying in a dream, but then you lose it. Kind of like that old sitcom, Greatest American Hero, I think it was called, where there's this superhero who's kind of a superhero, but he had to believe in himself. And sometimes he'd fly and then he would crash. It reminded me of that. So I learned to fly cast. He talks me into getting some gear. I'm done with school. I move back and I start going out fly casting. Now, I don't believe I'm good enough to catch snook because I know that I can't cast, I can't fish. So I hear that bonefish are plentiful in this one area. I go down there and I start practicing my casting with a little bonefish fly on, looking for bonefish. And that is how I accidentally became a saltwater bonefish guide. So that first year, I catch chicken pox for the first time. I've never had it, and I'm like, in my early 20s, and I get it. And so I'm quarantined. I can't be around anybody who hasn't had it. But one of my cousins has had it, and he lives on a brand new development with a dock in the canals. And he's like, oh yeah, we have a light, and there's baby tarpon out there every night. Why don't you come over, man? Bring your gear. So we go down there, we jump a few tarpon, and then he's like, weren't you telling me you saw some snook by this dock? Now it's summertime again. The same dock I first saw the snook on. I had seen snook again. But again, I didn't feel like I was ready. I was like, and I didn't have any snook flies. I just had some tarpon flies, which we'll get to in a second. So we go down there, and there's a bunch of snook, but they're not biting as usual. So I'm casting, I'm catching a bunch of baby tarpon. It's a blast. I've got a crappie 8-weight and an old Orvis bat and kill reel. I don't know enough about fly fishing yet, so I do have some bite tippet. I think it's like 60-pound mono, maybe like this much of it, tied inexpertly to some 8-pound like freshwater Orvis leader material. 8-pound. My buddy's like, dude, there's some snook over here. Try it again, try it again. I'm like, dude, they don't want to bite my fly. He's like, dude, there's one right here. I can see it. He see it in the light from the dock. So I make a backhand cast. And in that moment, the words of a magazine came back to me where somebody was talking about snook fishing. They said, the thing about snook is they're lazy. They don't want to chase your fly. So you have got to make a fly look alive without pulling it away from them. So I immediately switched up my retrieve. Instead of like a standard strip for like baby tarpon, I went tick, 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 bump. I bumped this fly. It's a tarpon fly. I feel something hit it. I come tight, and this head comes out of the water. Now I'm standing on the dock. The fish, I know the fish is just going to run under the dock. Now, because I'm standing on the dock, I pull from the direction of the dock, the fish runs away from the dock. While he's running away, I run down the dock and I run up the beach away from the dock. Now, as soon as the fish feels that direction, it shoots towards the dock. I'm leaning on my little crappie 8-weight. I finally stop it before the dock and I fight it. I mean, snook don't fight that hard. To be honest, like if they're a fun fish, they're one of my favorite fish, but this isn't a bonefish, A bonefish that size, 200-300 yards of back end would be gone, especially on 8-pound. But I'm able to stop this fish. I fight it for a while. Every once in a while, in the light of the dark, I can see a head shake, you know. And I'm like freaking out. We finally get it up close. I give the rod to my buddy. I walk down and I get my fingers around that 60 pound. I slide this fish onto the beach and it just keeps coming. Now I want to release it. But first thing I do is I lay down beside it and I measure it. It's the length of my leg. It's over 30 inches, easy. I pop the little fly out, take it back into the water, you know, revive it, and it just takes off. No picture, didn't, you know, no food, no nothing. Before I caught my first bonefish, I had fulfilled my goal of catching a snook on a fly, which is why I got into fly fishing to begin with. And I'm going to show you how to tie that fly today. That was around midnight, so that fly became known as the Midnight Special. Now, there's nothing that special about this fly. It's a standard split wing tarpon fly. Looks a lot like this. Got a split wing. It's splayed. A little bit of something in the middle to keep the feathers from fouling, and a palmered hackle for the heads. This is basically an stew-apt tarpon fly, but with splayed wings, right? Those early stew-apt flies had straight wings, and these are splayed. Now, we didn't have a lot of fly fishing materials here. You couldn't just go down to a fly shop because there was none. So a lot of the early tarpon flies that I tied them using roadkill rooster neck hackle. There's a ton of roosters here. Be driving along, there'd be a freshly killed rooster. I would keep a Ziploc baggie with some salt in it, you know, or some borax or something. I would go and I'd grab feathers off of both sides of the neck, put them on that baggie, and that's how I got tarpon flies. Now, and they're beautiful. The thing about them is they are this bright orange color with a black triangle in the middle of them, and they are hyper rigid because they've never been sort of processed, and they keep that splayed posture really, really well, and all kinds of fish love them. I've since learned that that's called a furnace feather, and you can buy them. You just buy furnace. They're orange, brownish orange with this black triangle in the middle, and for my money, they're the best feather that you can use for a classic split wing tarpon fly. So let's tie the Midnight Special. So for the Midnight Special, you're gonna need a few things. I have some roadkill rooster feathers here. You probably can't get roadkill rooster where you're at, so you're gonna wanna get yourself some furnace feathers. And then we're just gonna need any kind of bucktail. You want some other kind of either hackle or Schlappen where it's dark. Black or purple is perfect. You're fishing at night or in tannin stained waters, you want something dark like this, and that really seems to be able to, like, the fish can focus on that dark head. And a little bit of crystal flash or flashaboo. Doesn't matter what kind. I use gold, I use clear, it's all good. Finally, you need a hook. Now, one of the biggest mistakes people make with baby tarpon, juvenile tarpon, is using way too big of a hook, you know, with too thick of a wire. If you use a really big hook with a thick wire, it's really hard to get that hook into these little fish's mouths. They're very lightweight. They tend to rush towards you when they eat the fly. And so if you have a thick wire hook, especially with a big barb, it's really difficult to get them hooked. And so you jump a lot of them off. So I'm using these #2 Mustad Legacy series. I love them. They come with an alpha point, chemically sharpened as a needle, and they have a super slick coating on them. They penetrate super easy, especially if you remove the barb, which we're gonna do. You don't need a barb. You want that fly to penetrate in all the way like a hypodermic needle. Now, doesn't really matter what color thread. I'm gonna choose a bright orange because I think it complements it really well. Again, I love my little craft scissors because I can hold them in my hand like this. All right, so the first thing we're gonna do, this is a super simple fly. We're gonna tie in some of this bucktail. So make a few wraps. I'm going to point out something here. When I go to make a wrap, you see how that thread goes back toward the bend of the hook? That's because I've spun the thread counterclockwise, which unravels it and allows me to make a nice, easy, soft loop with my fly tying thread that wraps back towards the bend of the hook. I'm going to taper this, cut it like that. Make sure that I'm holding it while I lock it in. You're going to be tempted to tie this fly further up on the head of the hook. Don't do that, because then you have way more chance of it fouling. Everything here should be tied pretty far back. Next, we're going to add in some crystal flash. I usually just grab a couple of strands, pull them out, gonna double them over. I'm not too particular whether or not it's perfect. Now I'm gonna pull them under the thread so they're locked onto one side. I like to have them each on either side. Pull it around like that, lock it in on the other side. So now they're both, you can see that there's wraps on both sides. And cut them roughly the same length, a little bit longer than the bucktail. Make sure that's secured. And now I can tie in my feathers. So the trick to tying in these feathers is pretty simple. I'm gonna get my tips lined up first. And I'm not gonna trim any of this material here. I'm not gonna strip off the barbules or whatever. I've found that if I do it like this, there's way less chance of these feathers twisting on me. I'm not gonna make it too long. I just want it to be slightly longer than the tail. So not that long of a flight. The longer these are, the more likely they are to foul. I get a minute where I can adjust to make sure all the feathers are the same length, and then I'm gonna lock them in. The most important part here is that I don't want these feathers to twist. I want them to just be splayed but not twist. Then I take my other side. Now when I tie this in, I'll make sure they're lined up, but I'm not going to start on the side. I'm going to start sort of on top, make a couple of wraps, and then I pull those feathers around so that they mirror and match the other side, and then very slowly lock them in place. If I put them on the side and try to tie them in place, what'll happen is that they'll twist and go on the bottom of the hook. So I want this splayed pattern like that. Okay, so I've got my splayed feathers. Now I'm going to trim both sides without trimming my thread. Okay, there we go. And then trim back some of the feather material. And now I'm going to lock it down and start building the head of the fly. So far, the fly, you could fish this fly just like this. Again, I'm not looking to build this fly way up here. I want it to be far back, because the further back it is, the less likely these feathers are going to wrap around the hook shank. They're going to do it anyway, but we're trying to fight that as much as we can. So for the neck, for the head, I want this something that has really long barbules like this, rather than a long slender feather. And I'm going to use black on this one. It's okay if you keep some of this fluffy stuff. Again, we're fishing in tannin stained water or at night, and so we want this thing to push water. When I tie it in, what's critical is that I tie it in at an angle. I don't know if you can see that, but this isn't tied straight. It's tied at an angle because I'm going to start wrapping and palmering this feather. So I lock it in. And now pull back all the material back towards the bend of the hook and start wrapping around. Every wrap, I'm pulling the material back. And this is why you want one of those wide feathers. Trying to make the wraps as close to each other as possible. Until you're pretty well out of feather. Right about there, I can back off my thread and capture the end of that feather. The next thing you can do is you can comb it out. That helps organize all the barbules. Now I'm gonna wet my finger and pull those back, and I'm gonna flatten my thread again, because this helps with this. Spin it counterclockwise, and I'm gonna wrap back towards the bend of the hook, and that's gonna make that tapered head shape that we associate so much with these old classic split wing, splayed wing, I should say, tarpon flies. There you go. That is pretty well done. I'm gonna build up a little bit of head, which I find the best way to do that is to, again, spin and flatten my thread out, because the flattened thread makes smoother wraps. And then I can do my whip finish. Again, flattening the thread by spinning it. I'm going to do about 5 wraps like that. Do 5 more. As I'm doing this, I'm finishing the shape of that head, although I can guarantee you that a tarpon does not care what the shape of that head is. I usually do 2 because I'm worried that it'll come unraveled. And now I'm gonna seal this with some head cement. If you really want this fly to last, you can use some of this loon stuff and hit it with the light. That works great if you want this fly to last forever. I think feathers are a fairly delicate material anyways, and so this isn't gonna last that long. So I'm just gonna hit it with this fingernail hard as nails to seal the head. And by the time this head gets torn up, the rest of the fly is gonna be torn up anyway. So there you have it. This is one of my favorite tarpon flies for dirty water, or dawn or dusk. It pushes a lot of water. Got a big fat head. I love the way that the furnace, black on that furnace, fades into this dark head. It's what I caught my first snook on, and my biggest snook to date, 30 inches. I've caught other snook on that in the daytime, again in that dirty water where the bait fish come in. I think it's a great all-around flight for tarpon, snook, big jacks, stuff like that. Anyway, until next time, thanks for joining us on another Fly-Tying Storytime. Stay salty, my friends.